Hey, it's Emma Chamberlain. I designed these new glasses for Warby Parker, and I basically can't take them off. Like, I'm showering in them and sleeping in them. They're just that good. Go see them all at warbyparker.com. And you know what? Have a good day too. Okay? All right? Bye.
How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Greetings, conversationalists. Welcome. It's Eric Erickson here across the fruited plain of America. Glad to have you with me. The phone number, if you want to be on the program, 877-973-7425. As always, if you text ENGAGE to 33777, you can get tickets to the gathering August 8th through the 11th in Atlanta, Georgia, where we take our listeners and readers online and on radio, bring them together in person. Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, is going to be there. Mike Pence, former vice president of the United States, is going to be there. Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, is going to be there. Doug Ducey of Arizona is going to be there. We'll have a lot more rolling out, announcing more and more. It's going to be a great lineup. So text ENGAGE to 33777. Get your tickets now for the gathering. I want to begin this hour. Hunter Biden is on trial, and I got some thoughts, not really about the trial per se, but just bear with me here. In 2016, during the Clinton-Trump campaign, the Democrats could not acknowledge what a terrible candidate Hillary Clinton was. And when she lost, they first blamed James Comey's public statements about the investigation into her emails and server and said it was election interference. And then they said it was the Russians. The Russians stole the election. To this day, despite the Mueller investigation proving it not being so, to this day, there are Democrats who are convinced the Russians stole the 2016 election. They're convinced. They can't acknowledge that they lost. In fact, Democrats have never been willing to acknowledge they've lost since Bush versus Gore. They can't acknowledge they lost it. It's always someone is to blame. It's never them. Fast forward to 2020, and Hunter Biden's laptop became a story. 51 supposed national security experts, including the current Secretary of State, and a number of people who are now talking heads on television, they released a letter and said, like in 2016, the Russians stealing that election, this was Russian disinformation. It is simply not true. Yesterday in Hunter Biden's trial, the FBI confirmed under oath in a courtroom, FBI agent confirmed the Hunter Biden laptop is real. Now, we've known this for some time, and in fact, more and more media outlets have begun to acknowledge the truth that the Hunter Biden laptop was real all along. The emails were real. The emails and texts about payments to the big guy were real. Everything was real. Now, separate story. After 2020, one of the very first people to suggest that the COVID virus came from a lab, Senator Tom Cotton. Now, Democrats and the left first were the ones to use the China virus, the Wuhan virus, the China virus. But when Donald Trump started saying it, suddenly it became racist to say the China virus. Even though the members of the media had been referring to it as the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus, the virus from China, the virus from Wuhan, that suddenly became racist to say. And when Tom Cotton suggested that the COVID virus came from a lab in China, the media went nuts, accusing him of racism. Tom Cotton's point was that it's absurd to think that this virus jumped from an animal to a human at a Chinese wet market when there was a lab in Wuhan studying these viruses and studying gain of function on these viruses. And the first that we know of illnesses came from people who were at that lab. What do you think is more likely, that it came from the lab or came from a wet market? And by the way, isn't it racist to say, no, actually, it's the Chinese diet that caused the virus as opposed to a lab that studies these viruses? But the media went with it was more racist to think it came from a Chinese lab than to think it came from Chinese eating disgusting food at a wet market. Apurva Mandavili is the New York Times germ immunology and healthcare writer. And Apurva Mandavili on social media tweeted this. She tweeted this on Twitter. Someday we will stop talking about the lab leak theory and maybe even admit its racist roots. But alas, that day is not yet here. Apurva Mandavili is the healthcare writer for global health and infectious diseases at the New York Times, still on the payroll. And it is now the New York Times that has done a very deep dive into the origins of COVID and concluded, yeah, actually, it probably came from a lab. The FBI is correct. The Department of Energy, which studies these sorts of things, is correct. It probably did come from a lab. Why? Because the lab in Wuhan studied these sorts of viruses, and the very first people that we know of who got sick from the virus worked at that lab. It's probably the fact that it came from that lab. And so the New York Times reporter for healthcare says that's racist, and yet she works for the New York Times that says it probably did. These are two separate stories, but they all relate to the same thing. Glenn Kessler is the fact checker at the Washington Post. Ted Cruz, back in May 1st, 2020, tweeted, "Amazing is definitely the right word for this video. The Washington Post abandoning all pretense of journalism to produce CCP propaganda," that would be Chinese Communist Party propaganda, would be another way to put it. If this reporter submitted this video in a freshman logic class, it wouldn't receive a passing grade. This was Ted Cruz responding to a Washington Post animation that the Washington Post produced based on Chinese Communist Party talking points to show that it'd be virtually impossible for the coronavirus to come from that lab. Glenn Kessler, the fact checker for the Washington Post, responded to Ted Cruz with this, quote, "I fear Ted Cruz missed the scientific animation in the video that shows how it is virtually impossible for this virus jump from the lab, or the many interviews with actual scientists. We deal in facts and viewers can judge for themselves." Apparently, the animation was scientific. Now, the New York Times concludes the virus most likely did come from a lab, and notably, the person who wrote this in the New York Times was one of the foremost skeptics of the lab leak theory. Glenn Kessler, a fact checker at the Washington Post, attacked Ted Cruz for pointing out that actually the lab leak theory was the most obvious source. The New York Times healthcare reporter attacked people as racist for suggesting the lab leak theory was the most obvious thing. It turns out the lab leak theory holds up. The Department of Energy has biohazard labs. The Department of Energy specializes in tracing biohazards. The Department of Energy has concluded the lab leak theory is the most credible one. The FBI has concluded it. The CIA says it doesn't have a position, but it leans towards the lab leak theory. Now, the New York Times, a skeptic of the lab leak theory, posts a comprehensive op-ed where a lot of people are saying, you know what, this actually makes a lot of sense. It probably came from the lab. Yes. And everyone who said that was labeled racist. 51 supposed experts said that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. This is from the New York Post. For the first time Tuesday, first son Hunter Biden's notorious laptop from hell, whose scandalous contents were first reported by the New York Post 4 years ago, was shown to a jury of his peers, with federal prosecutors making it a key part of their case, accusing the president's child of illegally owning a gun while addicted to drugs. The pivotal moment unfolded after prosecutor Derek Hines brought out a plastic-wrapped laptop, walked it across the courtroom, and presented it to his first witness, FBI agent Erica Jensen. Jensen took the MacBook Pro 13 and verified, after looking at the serial number, that it had, in fact, belonged to Hunter Biden. Prosecutors from the Office of Special Counsel David Weiss must prove to jurors that Hunter, 54, intentionally lied on a gun application form by claiming he didn't do drugs when he purchased a Colt Cobra revolver. The feds were quick to begin using information extracted from the laptop to lay out a timeline of when they say Hunter was using before and after he bought the firearm. 51 experts told us that the laptop was Russian disinformation. And when it turned out it wasn't, they said, well, maybe some of the contents of the laptop were disinformation. They were wrong on all of that. Some of these people are still on CNN. Some of these people are still on MSNBC. Some of these people are still regularly quoted in the media. Where do we go for our apology? The laptop had nothing to do with Russian information. The lab leak theory was not racist, and everyone in the media insisted the one was disinformation and the other was racist. Where do the American people go to the press to get their apology? Do you wonder why people don't trust the American press corps? This is actually for you guys in the press. Do you understand why people do not trust you? You lied about the Hunter Biden laptop. You ran the story that it was Russian disinformation. You people ganged up on one of your peers, the New York Post, and encouraged Twitter to censor the New York Post for telling the truth. You people, you reporters did that, not us. Not the people you say are a threat to democracy. You people who are a threat to democracy, you're the ones in the media who did that. You people are the ones who told us the laptop was Russian disinformation, and you people are the ones who told us it was racist to say the Wuhan virus came from a lab. We were racist for doing it. We were pawns of the Russians. You lied. You lied the whole time. You vilified Americans who didn't agree with the left-wing agenda. You vilified Americans, and you're doing it again now. You're calling Donald Trump a threat to democracy without a hint of irony towards Democrats who try to unilaterally take him off ballots. Rejected unanimously by a Supreme Court that you people in the press continue to undermine because they're not giving the left their way. You people in the press have refused to cover Judge Merchant's political donations and raise questions about its conflict of interest. You're willing to raise questions about Judge Eileen Cannon's conflict of interest because she was appointed by Donald Trump. You're not willing to do it to Judge Merchant, who gave specifically money earmarked to a fund to stop Trump and his right-wing agenda. You people in the press have destroyed your own credibility. You worry about disinformation. You worry about misinformation. You wring your hands over what AI could do and the threats. You people are the biggest liars out there. Y'all are the ones peddling disinformation and misinformation, but the problem is you're doing it for an agenda. You're doing it for the specific agenda of helping the left. Your credibility is shot through. Your ratings are down. People aren't buying your newspapers, and you're blaming other people instead of yourselves. You lack humility. You lack honesty. You lack the self-awareness to acknowledge you've made mistakes, and you lack the ability to say you're sorry for lying to the American people. Instead, you want to lie about others. And then the people who lied to the American public about the laptop, the people who lied to the American public about the virus, you platform them. You give them contributor deals. You put them on to continue their lying to us, and then you wonder why we don't believe you. That's why. You people are a bunch of hacks and liars. You can't be honest about the Hunter Biden laptop. You've failed to be honest about the lab leak theory. You've promoted the people who called others racist because of the lab leak theory. You promoted people who called Russian disinformation the Hunter Biden laptop. This is why people don't trust you. The American people need a free and honest press. And what we have is a press captive to their hatreds of the right and therefore willing to say or do anything to stop their political opponents. That's not a free press. That is a press enslaved to their fears and hatred of others.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Welcome. The phone number, 877-973-7425. Here's a great headline that'll make you smile. Investors pull cash from ESG funds as performance lags. Global investors are turning their backs on sustainability-focused stock funds as poor performance, scandals, and attacks from U.S. Republicans hit enthusiasm for a much-hyped sector that has pulled in trillions of dollars in assets. Clients have withdrawn a net $40 billion from ESG equity funds this year, according to research from Barclays, the first year that flows have trended negative. Redemptions, which include a record monthly net outflow of about $14 billion in April, have been widespread. The outflow marks a significant reversal for a sector that investors have flocked to in recent years, attracted by the claim that such funds could help change the world for better. This was bound to happen. These companies tend not to get good rates of return, and ultimately investors want a rate of return, and they're just not that good at it. By the way, that's not me. I do enough stock research on my own. I used to be really good at it. I got out of it. Then I started getting back into it. Now I've been subscribing to Value Line and can read every week when the reports come in on all the companies. And the ESG companies suck. They don't have a good rate of return compared to a lot of other companies. In fact, the oil companies have some of the best rates of return right now. And the energy companies, my gosh, because of Bitcoin and AI, your energy utilities right now are actually great companies to be invested in. I've seen my stock soar. I've got one share of NVIDIA, and it is like dominating my portfolio right now. I bought it when it was like $600 a share, one share of it, and now it's like $1,200 or $1,300. It's not exactly a woke company. And technology companies, energy companies, they're skyrocketing, and the ESG companies doing terribly. And also, yes, Republicans have been pounding on the wokeness of some of these ridiculous companies, and now they're starting to lose money and have people withdraw their investments from them. Good. Pointing out the absurdity of ESG is a good thing. I notice when I go into like my Schwab account, I can look at a list of all the ESG companies, and I do, and make sure those are the ones I'm avoiding. In any event, I got to move on. But first, I need to tell you about Hillsdale College. They're taking your temperature on how you think about picking the president of the United States, their presidential selection survey. You can go to Eric, E-R-I-C-K, ericforhillsdale.com today and take their presidential selection survey. Now, this is actually kind of important. Normally, they educate you guys, and they want you to educate them on where you stand right now. And the reason it's important is because a number of states are trying to change, without amending the Constitution, they're trying to change how the president is picked. And Hillsdale's interested in where you guys stand on this, their presidential selection survey. Do you support the existing electoral college? Do you want it tied to the popular vote? What do you want? Go to Eric, E-R-I-C-K, ericforhillsdale.com today. While you're there, you can look and find more information on Hillsdale College. It's a great college in Michigan, spreading out around the country. They've got a great facility in Washington, D.C. as well. I know so many sharp graduates of Hillsdale College. It's a fantastic place to get an education. And right now they want you to educate them on where you stand on the presidential selection survey. ericforhillsdale.com, E-R-I-C-K, ericforhillsdale.com. Go check it out today. Tell Hillsdale where you stand on the issue.
With Lululemon, the real gift happens when they're living in it. When you give the fan favorite everywhere belt bag, the real gift is... And when the ultra-soothing Rest Feel slides are the gift, you're really giving them... This holiday, Lululemon makes it easy to give little luxuries that go beyond. Open the moment. Shop now at Lululemon.com.
Hello and welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the nation. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you want to be on the program, I am happy to have you. We gotta go back to yesterday's story. I'm glad I was able to get in the first hour of the show yesterday and talk about the Wall Street Journal story. Democrats and Republicans alike telling the Wall Street Journal Joe Biden is slipping. What's notable here is the Democratic response was, one, it was hysterical outrage, but two, I mean, it sounds like the White House was pressuring Democrats to reach out to the Wall Street Journal to go on record, say nothing's wrong. And in fact, they did so, going on screaming that the Wall Street Journal refused to include their quotes. The reporter in charge of the piece was on CNN yesterday, had this to say about the claims.
So we heard from administration officials that McCarthy did say that the president was sharp in meetings. Our reporting also suggested that McCarthy was doing that tactically because he had to get along with President Biden at a time when the country was at really risk of a debt default if there was not some type of a deal. So you can take that for what it's worth. You can decide McCarthy is not credible or that he is, but that's what our reporting showed.
That's what the reporting showed. So Michael LaRosa has spoken up. This is notable because Michael LaRosa was Jill Biden's press secretary. Now, he was forced out of the White House over some complaints about his behavior. He had been a producer for Chris Matthews' Hardball show, worked for the White House, and was the spokesman for Jill Biden. Let me read you his tweet. Really notable. 1, the faux outrage over the use of blind sources is especially rich coming from political staffers in both parties. 2, what credible or objective reporter outlet actually wants to take the same on-the-record quotes from provided by the White House's approved list of surrogates to offer with the same pre-approved and White House written talking points? The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post are not extensions of the Democratic Party. 3, if age is clearly still this sensitive for the White House at this stage, then why wouldn't they provide the Wall Street Journal with powerful voices who are in the room with the president every single day and know him best and work closely with him to go on the record, unscripted and authentic? The First Lady, Valerie Zintz, Blinken, Naomi Biden, Ashley Biden, Barack Obama, Bill and Hillary Clinton. Come on now. Would any legacy newspaper, including the Wall Street Journal, ever turn down or kill a quote from one of those voices? Also, this Wall Street Journal story clearly states that, quote, interviews were with Republicans and Democrats who either participated in meetings with Biden or were briefed on them, including administration officials and other Democrats. Most of those who said Biden performed poorly were Republicans, but some Democrats said he showed his age in several of the exchanges. Let's not pretend like we don't know what happens to Democrats who regurgitate unfiltered, unapproved, and unscripted analysis. Why would any of the 20 Democratic administration officials and lawmakers who spoke go on the record with their candid impressions? Isn't a White House staffer on the record multiple times in the Wall Street Journal story? This is notable that this guy was Jill Biden's spokesman. And he's noting the White House could have provided people to the Wall Street Journal, but they didn't, to have candid, frank conversations. They didn't do that. The problem here is that the White House tells us all the time behind the scenes Joe Biden is sharp as a tack. And the reality is we see for our own eyes Joe Biden in public, and he's not. This morning at the D-Day ceremony in France, Joe Biden was confused as to whether or not he could sit or not and began to sit and would stand and begin to sit until Jill Biden had to cover her mouth and whisper to him to stand up. We see Joe Biden get flustered on stages. It's not a speech impediment that keeps him from wandering stages in multiple directions. It's not a speech impediment that has Joe Biden recognizing people who are dead or hostages or not in the room. It's not a speech impediment that has Joe Biden telling repeated lies. It's not a speech impediment that Joe Biden loses his train of thought and says all right and moves on to an unrelated point. These aren't speech impediments. It's not stuttering. It's the sign of a man over 80 years old. The White House is furious with the Wall Street Journal. What's notable is that, yes, most of the on-the-record quotes were from Republicans, which you would expect, given that this White House hates any Democrat who says anything off script. What's notable is that Democrats were willing to talk to the Wall Street Journal behind the scenes without attribution and confirm that, yes, Joe Biden is a man who is old. Mitt Romney is probably the most helpful Republican for Joe Biden, and even Mitt Romney came out and said, yeah, he's over 80 years old. That's the problem for Joe Biden. Right now, the polling shows that Americans are concerned about Joe Biden's age. They have every reason to be concerned about Joe Biden's age. What the White House has failed to articulate is that if Donald Trump gets elected, he will be the same age as Joe Biden was when Joe Biden was elected in 2020. But the problem is that you and I, with our own eyes, can see Joe Biden unscripted and Donald Trump unscripted. And yes, both men unscripted say funny things. Donald Trump has gotten Nikki Haley confused before and asked some odd questions, but it's also unprompted and off script and funny. Joe Biden goes off script, and it's not the humor that you see, it's the dementia that you see. When Donald Trump goes off script, he's deeply funny, hilarious, sometimes inappropriate. When Joe Biden goes off script, he starts telling stories that are not true and then loses his train of thought halfway through and says, all right, and moves to something else. You know, on the debate stage at the end of this month, all Donald Trump has to do is let Joe Biden talk. And when he loses his train of thought, say, Mr. Biden, Joe, just finish your thought and watch Joe Biden meander. This is the problem for the White House. I reject the idea that it's too clever by half and too easy that they scheduled this debate for the end of June so that if Joe Biden has a bad debate, they can push him off the stage and go with someone else. That's not really true. And I know some of you believe it. You'll be undeterred, and you'll never acknowledge it when it doesn't happen. You'll never acknowledge that you believed it and are mad at me for telling you it's not true. Joe Biden has a massive chip on his shoulder, And the result is Joe Biden wants to run for president to prove he can beat Trump. And all the naysayers in the Democratic Party and all the naysayers in the Republican Party were wrong. He's got a massive chip on his shoulder. He wants to do this. But here's the thing. The debate was not scheduled at the end of June so that he can be shoved aside if it's bad. It was scheduled at the end of June so he can be forgotten if it's bad. People will move on, just like they will Trump's conviction. The problem is that what's going to happen is it's going to be bad if it is bad, and people are going to start clamoring for him to be pushed aside. So I don't think that it was done to push Joe Biden aside. I think the effect of it will be for them to want to push Joe Biden aside if it is bad. I think that will be the ultimate fact. It was political malpractice for them to do something like this, unless they really do want to shove him aside. And I don't think Biden's team wants to shove him aside. Remember, Biden's team is actually pretty angry at the whole idea of this narrative that he's too old. They really want you to believe that Joe Biden is sharp. They really want you to believe that behind the scenes he's got it with him, that he's got it together. The problem is we never see that in person. We never see it in person. We never see Joe Biden, the Mensa candidate. We see Joe Biden, the man who's at war with the English language. And meanwhile, Donald Trump can shift the conversation dramatically with a VP pick and change the dynamic. The short list is out. Ron DeSantis is not on it. I am told very reliably from sources close to DeSantis that he flat out does not want to be vice president, so we should not expect him to be on it, that if asked, he would turn it down. Among those on the list, according to the Associated Press, are Doug Burgum, the North Dakota governor, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, and South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. Byron Donalds, the Florida congressman, and Elise Stefanik, the New York congresswoman, are also being considered along with Ben Carson. Now, Marco Rubio, like Ron DeSantis, has a 12th Amendment problem. The 12th Amendment says that if two people from the same state run for president and vice president, that state's electoral college votes can't be counted. So that probably precludes Marco Rubio. Now, there are some people who say actually it would just be the vote of the vice president, so it would go to the Senate. He'd still be confirmed that it's plausible. I don't know that we want to open ourselves to that historic bit of controversy there, but Trump might want that fight. I don't know. Tim Scott, I think, makes a ton of sense just because having the descendant of slaves on stage debating a woman whose family owned slaves would be hysterical to watch. Kamala Harris lament the state of this country, and Tim Scott loves this country. Doug Burgum brings a lot of money. J.D. Vance brings some youth and the Rust Belt populism that he's risen to fame with. I don't know that having white guys as vice president right now actually really works for Trump. If you have someone like Scott, yes, you have a younger black man at a time that young black men are moving towards the GOP. He'll be a newlywed, by the way. In fact, Tim Scott has had to bail out of the conference because they've set their wedding date for August 3rd. So he'll be on his honeymoon while we're at the gathering. I am intrigued by Rubio and Scott. Rubio has the 12th Amendment problem. Scott makes a lot of sense to me. There are some conservatives who are not as fond of Scott because he obstructed two judicial picks that they liked. But I think he makes a ton of sense. Burgum makes sense if you think about pocketbook. He's very wealthy. He could bring money to the campaign. But I just think that you want somebody to stand out and you want somebody likable. Joe Biden has a problem right now. It's not just that Joe Biden is as old as he is and people think he's frail. It's that the backup behind him is Kamala Harris and nobody likes her. People don't like Trump either. What's notable is he's still winning. The New York Times, I don't know if you heard, the New York Times went and surveyed 2,000 people who said they were Trump voters in their last poll, and the polling has only shifted 1 point in Biden's favor, a statistically insignificant shift. The verdict in New York has affected no one. No one has really changed their mind. And yet, you get somebody behind Donald Trump who people like, and it fundamentally changes the dynamics of the race. And I think it probably changes the dynamics in Trump's favor by having a likable vice presidential candidate, because nobody likes Kamala Harris. Nobody likes Trump. Nobody likes Biden. So put one likable person on the stage, and you're going to get more votes that way. The math makes sense to me in my mind if you do that. We'll see where he goes. In the meantime, Joe Biden's campaign still super sensitive about his dementia. Now, some of you are super sensitive about your computer problems, and you want to be good at your work, not at your computer. Vision Computers can help you. If you go to visioncomputers.com or call them at 404-COMPUTE, they can build computers for you, but they can also service your PCs. And you do not have to have bought a computer from Vision for them to service your PC. If you buy a computer from Vision, not only are you going to get a great deal, they're going to save you money, but their tech support comes for free with a computer from Vision. So if you're upgrading at your office, go to Vision, you get the computers and you get their world-class tech support for each of your computers. But if you have a computer and you need tech support and you can't afford the in-house IT guy or he's overwhelmed, you call Vision for $179 a year, not a month, a year per computer. They will be your IT person, and every one of your employees will get their phone number and they can call and say, hey, I got this problem with my computer. How do I do this? And they'll show them on the phone faster than a Google search, 15 seconds or less. They'll answer the phone. So your employees will be good at their jobs, and Vision will be able to be great at what they do for a living. Vision will be great at their computers. 404-COMPUTE. Call them at 404-COMPUTE. Tell them Eric sent you. Get an even better deal. Don't forget they can build a great PC for you as well. 404-COMPUTE or visioncomputers.com.
This episode is brought to you by Skinny Pop Popcorn. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Oh, so light and crunchy. Skinny Pop Original Popcorn is the snack you've been searching for. Made with just 3 simple ingredients: popcorn kernels, sunflower oil, and salt. Snacking never felt or tasted so good. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Give yourself permission to snack and pick up Skinny Pop Original Popcorn today.
Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. You can be on the show, 877-973-7425. Thomas, you're going to be up next. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And yourself?
Doing great.
I have a theory that if Biden truly wants to be reelected, the easiest thing for him to do now is to pardon Trump. And the reason he does that is he goes back to his original platform of unifying the country. So he does it under that auspice. It feathers his ego, and it cuts Trump off at the knees from all of the woe is me that he'll be parlaying both in monetary as well as in sympathy votes. This also then he can turn around and cancel the debates to say, I'm not going to debate this guy. I've pardoned him. I've done all I need to for this guy.
It would be funny if he went down the road. The question is, would Trump accept the pardon? And I don't think under the law that it matters whether you accept it or not. If he pardoned you, he's pardoned you. It would give Biden something. If Kathy Hochul did it in New York as well, it would forestall the appeals that Trump has, and he would be forever a convicted felon who was pardoned. It would make for an interesting juxtaposition. I just don't think that they're willing to do it because I think they hate him so much. And that's the thing here is they hate Donald Trump so much. They want him to be thrown in jail. They really, really want him in prison. So they're not going to pardon him. Whether he would accept the pardon or not doesn't matter. I don't think they will. This is a campaign driven by hatred of the other side. Hillary Clinton's tweet today comparing Trump and his supporters to Nazis. These are a group of people who fundamentally believe Republicans are a threat to democracy and need to be stopped. And the way to do it is to throw Donald Trump in jail. They are being driven by their emotions on this, not grounded in reality, but driven by emotion. So I don't think that's going to change. Now, y'all, I real quick here, I gotta throw this story in here. Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. Have you ever read that story? So Anthony Blinken got a bunch of Arab officials together to try to agree on the future of the Palestinians. And the United Arab Emirates, their foreign minister, compared the Palestinian leadership to Alibaba and the 40 Thieves and claimed that getting rid of one group of Palestinians and putting another group of Palestinians in charge would be no different. They're just a bunch of criminals stealing everything. I've been telling you guys for a while that the Arab nations hate the Palestinians, and they really hate the Palestinians. And here we come with the Emirati foreign minister saying this. Why would the UAE give assistance to the Palestinian Authority without real reforms? The foreign minister of the UAE asked. Great question. And I don't know why. The Palestinian Authority is a bunch of corrupt people. He's right on that. The disdain for the Palestinian leadership is real in the Middle East. And it's something that the Biden administration has completely been ignorant of, it seems, or just couldn't believe that the hatred was there, but it's real, and it's now spilling out into these private meetings. There will be no peace there with Emirati or Saudi help for the Palestinians.